So can you introduce yourself first off?
My name is Laura Hunter Hebner. I am 58 years old, lives in Clemson, South Carolina. Lived here for over 20 years. Married with 3 adult children, one of whom I'm talking to today. We're very proud of her. She's a social worker, works with victims of sexual abuse, and since that is part of my story, we agreed that we would talk about this.
Yeah. So, Mom, you know that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, right? So here at the South Carolina Coalition, we're doing a bunch of blog posts about sexual assault and how it impacts our communities and individuals. And so since I think you have a really moving story, I'm really excited and proud of you that you decided to come on and talk to me about this for a blog post. So.
Okay.
Cool. So, like many survivors of sexual assault, you were assaulted by your boyfriend, right?
Right.
Can you tell me, like, what was he like? What do you remember about him when you guys first started dating? What attracted you to him?
Well, the situation was, at the time, there was a program through the Lutheran Church where they were hiring young adults to work in different parts of the country to work with congregational youth groups to kind of, the youth groups were dying, and they were trying to kind of put some lifeblood back into them. I was assigned to Central Pennsylvania, and he had been the previous youth staffer. And I'm not exactly sure why he was still there when I got there.
Yeah.
But, he immediately started asking if I would want him to stay to kind of help me through the year. But I felt pressured by him, and the other thing that kind of made me feel pressured was I lived with a family, and the woman, the mother, was a widow, and her best friend had been Mike's supervisor, and she was also going to be my supervisor. And she is the one that arranged for me to live with her best friend, Margie. And they really liked him. And so I kind of felt like it would be disappointing to them if I said no, go on back. I remember he was from Washington State. The students liked him. He played guitar and sang, but he was also just really goofy, and kids in the youth group liked him, and I thought, well, maybe he could give me some ideas for how to plan meetings. I was learning to play guitar at the time, and I thought that might be helpful. But yeah, I was really unsure of myself. Even though we had that training, I kind of got to Pennsylvania and thought, why in the hell did I sign up for this? This is not going to be a fun year.
Yeah. So when did you guys start dating, or did I misunderstand that? Like, did you guys?
No, uh, it kind of got into a dating relationship pretty quickly, and I think that was part of the pressure too.
Yeah.
Was well, do you want me to just go home and that's the end of this, or do you want to have this boyfriend girlfriend relationship? And that was something that I wasn't sure about either. And my gut was telling me, this probably is not a good idea, but I was just worried about not knowing how to do the job.
Yeah.
So, not wanting to hurt his feelings, and not wanting to. I think that Margie and Nancy, his supervisor, and her best friend, just adored him, and they were very excited about the possibility that he might stay another year. So, not wanting to disappoint them, I said, "Well, yeah, why don't you stay?"
Yeah.
So,
and how old were you when you did this program?
I had finished 2 years of college. I went to a junior college and knew I was going to the University of Georgia next, and wasn't quite sure what I wanted to major in. I thought it would be a good gap year to kind of sort things out. Seminary was something I was thinking about but wasn't sure about. And I had never really lived anywhere without my family, without my parents. And I thought it would be exciting to live somewhere very different, And I felt like I had kind of lived within a safety net for my whole life, and I thought I needed to step out of that and try something more challenging.
Yeah. So, my purpose isn't to talk in depth about what happened, but, just kind of the general gist is a story that's pretty common to a lot of women survivors, where after he assaulted you, told you that it was his fault, right?
Yeah. What? I don't mind sharing details if the time allows. He lived in an apartment, but he would frequently stay over at Margie's house and sleep on the sofa or something like that. I had my own bedroom, but one night he talked me into sleeping on their. They had a screened-in porch, and I thought, okay, we'll both have sleeping bags, and it would just be. I didn't think it was going to be anything really physical, but then he crawled in my sleeping bag, and I just froze, and so this is the first account, the first time, and I didn't know what to do. I thought if I screamed for Margie to help me, that because she had this longer relationship with him and she completely trusted him, that she would think I had lied, or I just had the feeling that they would defend him. And even though looking back, I'm not sure they would have. I mean, she was a very decent person. And I don't have a lot of clear memories. I guess I just froze and blanked it out. And I remember after he was saying, well, you didn't move. You didn't seem like you were into it or something. I was like, no, I was paralyzed with fear. And so then I thought, okay, I'm in trouble here. He's going to be here all year, and I've got to keep this from happening again. But at the same time, I thought it was my fault because I never said no, verbally, even though I was definitely not encouraging it. And, I thought I should never even agree to sleep on the porch, because it didn't occur to me at the time that it would be putting myself in a vulnerable situation. But I thought, if I had been smarter, I could have prevented this. So the rest of the year is kind of a blur. I remember he came home, I think maybe at Thanksgiving with me, and my parents absolutely hated him. I mean, my dad just, he could size up a guy really quickly. And because Mike wore these really baggy pants, and he almost looked like Carrot Top, with that long, really awful.
You never told me that.
Yeah, kind of balding on top and this long curly red hair. And then he'd wear these dumb hats. And, I remember at my parents' house, we were going somewhere, and he put on one of those stupid hats. And my dad just gave him a death stare. And he quickly, pulled it off his head.
Like
so
ski hats or like baseball hats with weird stuff on them? Or what do you mean by...
Like a floppy hat or something. They weren't baseball hats. They were like bucket hats or floppy hats or something like that,
Okay.
I mean, yeah, he was weird.
Yeah.
And I've often wondered, why in the heck did I allow him to come home with me after he had assaulted me? But I think I was still thinking, what happened was my fault.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the year, he wanted me to come to visit his family in Seattle, and I went, and still not having a clear understanding of what the relationship was. I didn't see it really going anywhere because I had no intention of moving to Seattle, and he was very close to his family, and I didn't think he was going to move anywhere. But anyway, I don't remember how long the trip was for, but his parents wanted to go berry picking one day, and one very specific thing I remembered is what I was wearing, and at the time it was a real popular style of dress. It was a lot of elastic at the top, and then it would just kind of flare out, and you would have these spaghetti straps that you tie. And, you know, the sun was hot. I didn't want to get sunburn marks on my shoulders, so I just untied those. But, you know, the dress was still in place.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we spent that morning picking berries, and then in the afternoon, his parents had planned to go somewhere. And, you know, looking back, I feel so stupid that I didn't see, you know, that being alone with him at his house was very risky. But you know, he took me to his room, which was in the basement, and I did say no. I pushed him away. And he said, the minute you untied those straps, I knew that I was going to do this today. And, you know, I kept saying no. He wouldn't listen. He was stronger than I was. I couldn't overpower him. And, so again, I just froze, but at least that time I realized I said no, that his saying that it was because I had untied my dress straps, that, you know, he was claiming it was my fault, and I knew that was a bunch of shit. And so that's when I first started thinking, he's raped me. And but I didn't think that I could talk to his parents. I didn't think they would believe me.
Of course not.
I was, my parents hadn't been very wild about the idea of me going, just because of how they felt about him, and so I was afraid that if I called them, they, you know, would say, well, we told you not to go, you figure it out. You know, in retrospect, I think if I had called them, they would have helped me get home. But I can't remember how much longer it was that I had to stay there. But I don't have any clear memories of anything else. Yeah. You know, I felt trapped. He had several siblings. They were all boys. So I felt like I didn't have a female I didn't have a friend I felt like I could talk to help me figure out, how do I get out of here? How do I get home? And so I just stayed until my return flight. And I think he wrote me a few times after that, but I never answered a letter. I never contacted him. And, I found out later that, he got married and had some kids. And, at one time I thought, well, I should write a letter to his wife and say, do you know the son of a bitch you're married to? But, again, I thought, no, I don't want to get involved again. I just want to be out of this. But so even though my mom and dad didn't like him at all, they were very friendly with Margie and Nancy. They kept up a friendship for years, and they would tell Mike stories. And Margie and Nancy thought he was adorable. My parents thought he was an ass, but my parents had gotten to the point where they would just laugh about how stupid he was and how Dad could just cut him to the quick with a look. Yeah. So, they would tell me that, they had talked to Margie and Nancy, and that, of course, they kept up with him, and so they would tell me stuff that he was doing, and it just, every time his name was mentioned, I just felt my skin crawl. Oh, and I just remembered one other detail is when I got home from that trip to Seattle. I don't remember if I did it in the yard or what, but I burned that dress. It wasn't good enough to me just to give it to Goodwill. I didn't want it to exist anymore. And I'd never worn it again, and I just wanted it gone, so I burned it. But Mom and Dad would, be telling me these stories of stupid things that Mike had done, and every time his name came up, it's just like it was like being assaulted all over again. And I knew that if my parents knew, they would not be talking about him. And so one day I just I was afraid maybe that they would think that it was my fault, but I thought I've got to tell them, because I can't spend the rest of my life reliving this. So one day they were telling stories that they had heard from Margie, and I just stopped them and I said, I really can't listen to any stories about him or even hear his name, because he raped me. And I remember they were stunned, and I offered to tell them more details, and they said, we believe you. You don't have to give specifics. We'll never mention his name again. So I guess that it was surprising to me that they were so quick to say that. Not that I knew my parents loved me and cared about me and trusted me, but they both grew up in a generation where if a girl got pregnant before she was married, it was her fault. It was never the guy's fault. But to this day, they've never talked about him again.
Yeah. I mean, you grew up in that too. I mean, you didn't think anybody would believe you. You thought everybody would take his side, So, like, of course, you had gotten those messages from somewhere, I guess. And so, of course, that would have been what you expected from your parents. Because that's what, like, society was telling you, right? Was that not just in the 20s, but in the 70s and 80s and 90s, the message was like, don't get raped, right? Like, not,
Yeah.
I mean, even when I was in high school, it was about, like, risk aversion. And so what we talked about was, like, don't go out late at night, and don't, leave your drink unattended, and I don't know, have a buddy system and all of these things. And that's how we talked about, like, avoiding sexual assault instead of talking about actual prevention and talking about changing the way we talk about women or portray women. And before there was a big effort to say, like, it's important to believe survivors. Like, that's pretty, of course you thought that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long was it between, like, the end of your year and how long did you have to listen to Mike's stories?
Well, it was after Mom and Dad moved to Clemson. So.
Seriously?
Yeah. So it happened in, like, 1976.
They moved to Clemson in, like,
78 after 2 years of college. And I married your dad in 83. Grandma and Papa moved up here
in 2000.
in 2000 or 2001.
Because it was right when I started high school. It was like that summer before high school.
Yeah, and they had been here a few years before I told them, so it was a long, long time. And, so it was just, when I knew a story was coming, how you want to just block your ears and, pretend that nobody is saying anything, and I just wouldn't react. And I think they thought I was not laughing or not thinking it was funny because I had realized what an ass he was and was embarrassed that I'd ever dated him.
Yeah.
I don't think they imagined that he had assaulted me.
Yeah.
I know they didn't. They never would have talked about him if they had known.
Had you told anybody else?
Well, of course, I told your dad. I think I may have told, a few friends in college, but it was still you had to, kind of the cultural idea was you had to prove that it was not your fault.
Yeah.
It was, the assumption was that you had done something to seduce a guy. You'd either drunk too much, or your top was too low, or
yeah, and I think he used your clothing against you, kind of plays right into that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think I really started talking about it I mean, I talked about your dad to your dad about it because it bothered me so much, and but I guess the first time I remember talking about it a lot was with you and the boys, because I didn't want what had happened to me to happen to you. I think a lot of times, well, and for me, I grew up thinking, well, that will never happen to me. Because I'm a good student, I go to church, I'm a good daughter, I don't act out and get in trouble. And so I think you grow up thinking that, I don't need to worry about this because it's not going to happen. And when your babysitter and our friend was raped and murdered in Michigan, it became really clear. It can happen. It can happen anytime, any place, to any person. And I guess I just wanted to have to start that conversation with you and the boys, knowing that men get raped too, and to be sure the boys understood that a girl or a woman doesn't have to say no, but if they're uncomfortable, if if there's anything that you realize that they're afraid or not interested, then that means no.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like like if you look at campaigns against assault or marches and stuff and people's signs and all that kind of stuff, right? I think when you were coming of age, the signs were always no means no. And then when I became a sexual health educator in college, our mantra was always anything less than a yes is a no. And I lately have seen more and more yes means yes, right? You need to have affirmative, which is, anything less than a yes is a no is still that asking for affirmative and enthusiastic consent, but I don't know, it's kind of encouraging or makes me even more proud of you that you kind of were going through that evolution yourself as that was happening, and maybe a little bit sooner than when I really started seeing that publicly. But then it also, I guess, just makes me think how much trauma is being lived out in the way we have these conversations publicly, right? How many people had to start saying to each other and to their friends and family, I felt this way before we could start to see those patterns and to see, saying no means no isn't sufficient and isn't a good conversation, and we need to change the narrative.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's that's a huge part of what we do here at Skid Vasa, right? And I think that's why I'm like back in this work after like 7 years of not, 10 years, 10 years of like not doing sexual assault work, kind of coming back to it and saying like this is really important, because I think we're seeing that play out really publicly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
I'm kind of curious, like, we've talked about like that wasn't the conversation you had with your parents growing up. And even if, in the early aughts, when you did disclose to them what had happened to you, they absolutely believed you and absolutely stood by you and had this very compassionate response. When you were growing up, they weren't saying to you anything less than yeses and no. They weren't saying, it would never be your fault if you were assaulted. I guess they just weren't proactively having those conversations with you as a kid or as an adolescent or even as an adult. I think there's space kind of to have that conversation. You and I talk about stuff like this now, and I'm married, so like there was still space even in the 80s when they could have been talking about it and kind of missed the boat on that. Which isn't to say they were just like, they just didn't have that space, so they didn't do that. So do you think when you had those conversations with me and the boys as teenagers or now, I'm curious, like, do you have to think really hard and work really hard to say those things? Or are you kind of talking to your former self a little bit? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I do have to remind myself that it wasn't my fault. I remember when I went back to college after that year, and I would meet somebody in a class or something like that, and they might be showing some interest in a date. I would think, if you knew who I was and what's happened to me, you would not want to go out with me. Kind of tainted that even though I was saying this wasn't my fault, I was still trying to convince myself that it didn't mean I was a bad person, or that I had caused it, but I felt like it.
I remember. I wonder if
I don't know.
You're getting at, but like I remember in high school sex ed, like when they do the parts where they like split boys and girls apart and talk to us in separate rooms. I remember a male coach who taught health class at our school using the analogy that your virginity was like bubble gum and nobody wanted to chew bubble gum. And that was like,
he said what?
That basically like your virginity is your bubble gum and nobody wants to chew bubble gum. so as soon as you've had sex, you're chewed up, and nobody wants that. Like, so you've got to keep yourself like unchewed, which is really gross. But I think I can't remember who it is, but there was a really famous case from when I was a kid of a girl that went missing for a lot of years and was sexually assaulted repeatedly. And that was one of the things she had been told too. And so when she got out of that situation, I mean, she'd been kidnapped and held hostage and sex trafficked and all this. And she uses that analogy. So like, this is what's damaging. This is what's broken. And it seems like that's kind of, I mean, you might not have been told those things words, but that's kind of what you learned, or that's what you absorbed, and that's what you were kind of fighting against as a young adult. Is that fair? That same idea?
Yeah. Recently, I don't know, your grandfather and I were talking about, I don't know if it was, when he was in the war or what, but he said every man wants to marry a virgin, but they're all making damn sure there aren't any left.
Yeah. He said that while I was home. I remember him saying that.
Yeah. When I was in college, it was like a rite of passage for a guy. I mean, I'd even heard of boys' fathers taking them to see a prostitute, like on their 18th birthday.
Yeah.
To like initiate them into manhood, but it's such a shameful thing for a woman. And I think Mom certainly had some of those old-fashioned ideas. We'd see a movie and a female character would be real flirtatious or something, and you could just tell by her reaction that she was asking for it.
Yeah.
But as far as
I remember she'd be so scandalized by some movies or something like that, but then like she was the one who got really into Desperate Housewives and got me watching it when it first came out. So like she had such these like incompatible ideas about it.
Right.
Right. Do you
think
that? I mean, I wish we could have this conversation with her too, but do you think maybe that feeling about Helen, like, is why she believed you so quickly and she didn't want to talk about it either, and why she didn't ever want to talk to me about any of this? Like, do you think she talked to herself?
It could very well be. I had not really thought about it, but it could very well be. And in not wanting to talk to you about it, maybe she thought it wasn't her place, that it was my place, or your dad, mine and your dad's place to talk to you.
Yeah.
And I know that you feel that, or you've said that, we didn't give you much information, but I talked to your dad about it a couple days ago, and what I remember is we read you a book, and you were pretty young, and so we didn't want to answer questions that you weren't asking, and I thought we had tried to say, you'll have more questions as you get older, and please feel that you can come and talk to us, and you can ask questions, and we're not going to judge you or blame you for anything. We didn't expect the school to teach you anything.
That's good because they didn't.
Yeah. And and we didn't want you to just have to pick stuff up off the street, which a lot of times is just inaccurate.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not the message that you got.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
It may have had something to do with I read an article fairly recently about a woman who was raped and how it affected her marriage. That, even though she had this wonderful husband and she knew that he loved her and she knew he would never hurt her, just every time he would touch her, even casually on the shoulder, she'd flinch.
Yeah.
And that's how it is for me. Even after all these years, I can't remember how many therapists, both individual and as a couple, psychiatrists, even just general practice doctors. If your dad just touches me on the shoulder, I flinch and I freeze up and everything flashes back. And I've tried to let all that go, but it seems it's just never going to leave me. I think your dad understands, and after that initial, then I think, oh, it's Chris, and I love him and I trust him and I don't have to be afraid. But it's just that initial, oh my God, that I've heard is true for a lot of survivors. Mm-hmm. That they're just always on guard and can be very uncomfortable with touches, and it does. It creates problems in your relationships, in your marriage. If your automatic reaction isn't, oh, this is the person I love to spend time with, instead of, oh my God, that thing that happened to me 30 years ago, is still in my head and I can't get it out.
And that's super common. You've suffered trauma like that. You can't think it away and you can't logic it away to a certain extent. Like, it just is in that part of your brain that is fight or flight and just not accessible to by reason. Which I think is one of the horrible things about this crime, is that people do live the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders or jumping at touch or at a certain sound or a certain smell or a certain kind of cloth, like anything like that. That sensory can set that off for people.
Yeah, I even remember being in a fabric store and that elasticized top and I had a lot of those and they were so comfortable and easy to make, but the first time I saw them I thought, oh my God, they're bringing those back, and but I just thought by now, being close to 60, it would be gone by now, or I would have learned to deal with it. But it's very hard for me just to relax and not feel like I have to be ready to protect myself, even though I know that your dad has never done anything to hurt me or make me feel threatened or anything. I don't know if there's a way to make it go away. The counselors, therapists that I've talked to, none of them really had an answer. So, I guess I told you so early because I remember when you were in high school and being afraid that you were going to become sexually active in what I considered a time that was too young. And I remember when you were an undergrad at USC, and the idea of a co-ed dorm just freaked me out because I thought, oh my God, you're going to be surrounded by guys that might attack you. They might jump you in the shower. They might grab you in the hall when you're in your robe and drag you into their room. So I guess I do have a basic distrust for men, especially men I don't know. And I wanted for you to have a marriage the kind of marriage I had heard my friends talk about, or that I've seen in movies where your husband comes up behind you and gives you a big hug, and you just kind of sink into that feeling of comfort and security and enjoy sex without all these horrible memories. I just wanted you to have a marriage that wasn't well, it's more than cluttered. It's invaded by horrible feelings and memories that won't go away. I'm afraid of being hurt again. And so I'm just on guard, I guess.
Yeah. I'm so sorry, Mom.
What?
But I'm so sorry.
Well, and I appreciate you talking to me about this, and I'm proud that you are involved with women that have and I know that a lot of women have had much worse experiences. You know, the book you told me about when you got back from Mexico about what happens to some of the women who pay coyotes to bring them over the border, and you know, much worse things can happen, but it doesn't mean that what I've experienced isn't painful. It's a different kind of pain. You know, certainly watching someone kill your child, you know, would also be something you'd never get over. But you know, there's no point in arguing, you know, whose pain is deeper, who has been wounded more. You know, everybody who is a victim or a survivor has a story to tell and has pain that may go with him to the grave. And so,
None of it should happen to anybody.
yes.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
I'm really proud of the work you do.